The Nazis had terrorized Greece for years. Then one day, in a small village, their violence erupted without warning when hundreds of innocent civilians were murdered in hours, leaving long-lasting scars. But what followed was a brutal reckoning for the men responsible that would haunt them long after the war ended. It all goes back to April 1941 when Nazi Germany invaded Greece with overwhelming force. The Greek army had already been fighting non-stop since October 1940 when Italy attacked from Albania. Soldiers were exhausted, low on supplies, and spread thin across the mountains. When German tanks, planes, and infantry entered from the north, Greece had little left to stop them. German aircraft bombed cities. Communication lines broke down. Within 3 weeks, organized resistance collapsed. On April 27, 1941, German troops marched into Athens. By the end of the month, Greece was fully occupied. The country was cut into zones controlled by Germany, Italy, and Bulgaria. The Greek government fled. Law and order disappeared almost overnight. Daily life broke down fast. Food became the first weapon of control. German forces seized grain, livestock, olive oil, and fuel to supply their army. What remained was often taken by occupying authorities or sold on the black market. By the winter of 1941 to 1942, hunger turned deadly. In cities like Athens and Piraeus, people collapsed in the streets from starvation. Children swelled from malnutrition. Elderly people died quietly in cold apartments. Historians estimate that tens of thousands died during that single winter alone. Bodies were collected by carts in the early morning. Cemeteries overflowed. Control tightened everywhere. Roads were blocked by checkpoints. Travel between villages required permits that were hard to get. Curfews were enforced with violence. Anyone caught outside after dark risked arrest or execution. Radios were confiscated. Newspapers were censored. Even gathering in groups could be treated as suspicious. A single accusation could mean death. Despite this, resistance began to grow. At first, it was quiet. People hid food, they passed messages and helped escaped prisoners. Over time, it became organized. Young men left their homes and climbed into the mountains. They were joined by teachers who had lost their schools, farmers whose land had been taken, dock workers whose ports were destroyed, and students whose futures had vanished. Many had no weapons at first. They used hunting rifles, stolen guns, or whatever they could find. The largest resistance force was Hellas, which spread across central Greece and the countryside. These fighters attacked carefully. They blew up rail lines used to move German supplies. They ambushed small patrols on mountain roads. Each attack was small, but together they showed the occupiers were not in control. The Germans saw this as humiliation. They did not see resistance fighters as soldiers, but as criminals, and they believed fear was the only answer. The German response followed a clear pattern. If a German soldier was killed, civilians would pay the price. Entire villages were blamed for attacks they had nothing to do with. Hostages were taken from town squares and shot. Homes were burned as punishment. Notices were posted warning that any resistance would bring death to innocent people. The goal was to break the population by terror. This policy would soon reach a quiet farming village called Distomo. Distomo was located in central Greece, set between low mountains and wide olive groves in the region of Viotia. In 1944, about 500 people lived there, most families depending on farming to survive. They grew olives, wheat, and vegetables. They kept goats and chickens. Life was never easy, even before the war, but people helped each other. Doors were often left unlocked. Children walked to school together in the mornings. Even under occupation, the village tried to hold on to normal life. The war slowly squeezed Distomo. Food became harder to find. German soldiers sometimes passed nearby, and villagers stayed quiet when they did. People hid what little food they had left. At night, lamps were kept low. Everyone knew what had happened in other villages. People had heard about homes burned and civilians shot elsewhere in Greece. Still, Distomo had not been hit directly. Many believed that if they stayed out of trouble, the Germans would pass through and move on. By early 1944, the situation around the village had changed. Resistance fighters were active in the surrounding hills and forests. The terrain made it easy for them to hide and move quickly. German convoys used nearby roads, and those roads became targets. Because of this, German patrols increased. Armed trucks passed through villages more often. Soldiers questioned locals and searched homes. The villagers understood the danger but felt trapped. Leaving was not easy. Travel required papers that most people did not have. Families stayed together and hoped the violence would stay away. Nobody believed their village would be chosen for punishment. On the morning of June 10, 1944, German troops from the 4th SS Polizei Panzergrenadier Division were operating in the area. This division had a reputation. It was trained specifically to crush resistance movements. Its soldiers had already taken part in harsh reprisals in other parts of Greece. They were taught to see entire communities as enemies, not just armed fighters. Earlier that same day, German soldiers encountered Greek resistance fighters outside Distomo, in the nearby countryside. Shots were exchanged. A small number of German soldiers were killed or wounded during the clash. As the resistance melted into the mountains, Distomo remained exactly where it had always been: open, undefended, and full of civilians. The SS unit entered Distomo in the early afternoon, moving in from the surrounding roads. There was no plan to question people or look for fighters. The soldiers spread out through the village with weapons ready. From the first moments, it was clear this was not a normal operation, but a punishment. The soldiers began moving from house to house. People were pulled outside or shot inside their own rooms. Elderly men were dragged into yards and killed on the spot. Women were attacked where they stood, many trying to shield their children. Children were not spared. Some were shot while holding their parents' hands. Others were killed while hiding under beds or inside cupboards. Babies were murdered in their cribs. There was no order to stop. Some villagers tried to escape through back doors or narrow paths leading out of the village. They ran toward fields and olive groves, hoping to hide. The soldiers followed them, and they were shot while running. Others were caught and killed where they fell. The killing spread beyond homes and into farmland, turning places of work and food into places of death. After the shootings, soldiers set fire to houses and barns. Flames spread quickly through wooden roofs and stored hay. Animals trapped inside screamed as buildings burned. By the time the soldiers left, over 200 residents were dead. Dozens of them were children. Entire families had been wiped out. Some homes had no survivors at all. A few people managed to hide or were away from the village, but most of Diostomos' population was gone. The official number records 227 victims, though some accounts suggest the number may have been higher when nearby areas are included. Not a single German officer was injured inside the village. There had been no resistance there. No shots were fired at the soldiers from Distomo itself. Every victim was unarmed. The massacre was not the result of battle. It was a deliberate act against civilians. Survivors emerged slowly. Some had hidden under bodies. Some returned from fields and hills to find their families gone. There was no outside help. People buried the dead as best they could. Many graves were shared because there were too many bodies and not enough strength. Some victims were never properly identified. Children helped dig graves for their parents. Parents buried their children with their own hands. The trauma settled deep. Survivors stopped speaking for days. Nightmares became normal, and silence became safety. By the second half of 1944, the war was turning against Nazi Germany. Allied armies pushed forward from Western Europe after landing in France. At the same time, Soviet forces advanced from the east, crushing German defenses and retaking occupied land. German supply lines broke down. Trains stopped running. Whole units were forced to retreat on foot. Germany's control over the occupied countries began to collapse. In September 1944, German forces started pulling out of Greece. The withdrawal was rushed and chaotic. They destroyed bridges, roads, and ports as they left. What remained behind were burned villages, empty homes, and mass graves. Greece was free from occupation, but it was not healed. Many towns had lost a large part of their population. Across Europe, the damage was overwhelming. Entire cities lay in ruins. Millions of soldiers were dead. Civilians had been bombed, starved, or executed. Displaced people filled roads and camps. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, there was relief, but also shock at the scale of destruction. Many German soldiers surrendered to Allied forces. Some officers were arrested immediately. Others burned documents, changed clothes, and tried to blend in with civilians. Some escaped using fake names and even fled to different countries. Justice moved slowly and unevenly. Still, some killers were caught, and trials began across Europe. The most famous were the Nuremberg trials, where top Nazi leaders were judged. But beyond those leaders, thousands of lower-ranking officers had also committed crimes. Some were prosecuted, others were never touched. One clear example of justice being carried out in Greece was Friedrich Wilhelm Müller. Müller commanded German forces responsible for brutal reprisals, especially on Crete. Villages were destroyed. Civilians were executed. After the war, Müller was captured and handed over to Greek authorities. In 1946, a Greek military court tried him for war crimes. The evidence was strong. On December 9, 1946, he was sentenced to death. On May 20, 1947, Müller was executed by firing squad in Athens. Another was Friedrich Schubert, a German officer who led a paramilitary group operating in Crete and Macedonia. His unit was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of civilians. Schubert was captured after the war, tried by a Greek court, and found guilty. On October 22, 1947, he was executed by firing squad in Thessaloniki. Outside Greece, similar justice occurred in other countries. Friedrich Jeckeln, an SS general responsible for organizing mass shootings across Eastern Europe, including the murder of tens of thousands of civilians, was captured by Soviet forces. In 1946, he was tried and executed. His punishment showed that even high-ranking SS officers could be held accountable. But not every case followed that path. Some officers connected to atrocities in Greece were found living abroad. Through international cooperation, a few were arrested and returned to Greece. One of the officers connected to the Stomo, Hans Zampel, was located in Paris years after the war. He had failed to completely disappear. Greek authorities requested his extradition, and he was eventually sent back to Greece to face legal action. However, the case quickly became complicated. Greece later transferred Zampel to Germany, believing the German courts would continue the prosecution. Instead, German judges ruled in his favor. He was acquitted. After that decision, Zampel walked free. He was never punished for Distomo. Fritz Lautenbach, the SS officer who led the unit on the ground during the massacre, was never put on trial at all. After the war, he returned to civilian life. No court ever questioned him about Distomo. No sentence was issued. His name appeared in historical research, but not in a courtroom. Because of this failure, historians later described the Distomo case as a legal dead end. The crime was known. The victims were identified. The perpetrators were named. Yet, no punishment followed. This was devastating for the survivors and for the families of the dead. When the German occupation ended, Greece did not find peace. Instead, the country fell into another disaster. From 1946 to 1949, a brutal civil war broke out between rival Greek forces. The fighting destroyed what little stability remained. Towns were divided, families were split. The government focused on survival, not healing old wounds. For massacre survivors, this meant silence. There was no mental health care. Trauma was not discussed. People were expected to move on and rebuild with their bare hands. In villages like Distomo, survivors returned to burned homes and empty land. They rebuilt walls using rubble from the houses where their families had been killed. Many lived beside the ruins for years because they had nowhere else to go. Distomo slowly came back to life, but it was deeply scarred. Whole family lines had been wiped out. Children grew up without parents. Parents lived without children. The population stayed low for years because so many had been murdered. Funerals were more common than weddings. By the 1950s, Greece began officially asking for reparations from West Germany. The scale of destruction was massive. More than 300,000 Greeks had died during the occupation, many from famine caused by German requisitions, others from executions and village massacres. Distomo was one example among hundreds. In 1960, West Germany agreed to pay 115 million Deutschmarks to Greece. On the surface, it looked like progress. In reality, it solved very little. The money was classified as compensation for individual victims of Nazi persecution, mainly survivors of camps and forced labor. It was not meant to cover massacres. It did not mention Distomo, and it did not admit responsibility for the mass killings of civilians. Families from Distomo received nothing. For them, the deal felt cold and distant. Justice had been reduced to legal language and financial limits. As the decades passed, global politics took priority. The Cold War changed everything. West Germany became a key ally for Western powers. Holding it accountable for wartime crimes became uncomfortable. Greece, struggling economically and politically, had little leverage. The chance for justice seemed to fade. But memory did not fade in Distomo. In 1995, families of the Distomo victims took a bold step. They filed a civil lawsuit in a Greek court against the Federal Republic of Germany. Their argument was clear and direct. The massacre was not a military act. There was no battle inside the village. The victims were civilians. What happened was a war crime, and Germany should pay compensation. In 1997, a court in Livadia, near Distomo, ruled in favor of the families. The judgment ordered Germany to pay about 28 million euros in damages. It was a groundbreaking decision. For the first time, a national court held Germany financially responsible for a specific Nazi massacre committed during World War II. Germany refused to pay. The German government claimed sovereign immunity, arguing that a state could not be sued in another country's courts for actions taken during war. The case moved to Greece's highest court, the Areospagos. In 2000, the Supreme Court confirmed the earlier ruling. Germany was still ordered to pay, but the victory was only symbolic. Under Greek law, seizing German assets required approval from the Greek justice minister. That approval never came. Political pressure was intense. Germany was a major economic power. Greece was deeply dependent on international support. No government wanted a diplomatic crisis. On paper, the victims had won. In real life, nothing changed. No money was paid. No apology followed. Decades after the massacre, the families of Distomo refused to let the story die. By the 2000s, they tried a new path to enforce the Greek court's decision. Germany had assets in other European countries, including Italy, and the survivors' lawyers focused there. They argued that German property in Italy could be seized to satisfy the Greek ruling. Italian courts agreed to hear the case. In 2008, an Italian court officially recognized the Greek judgment, giving the Distomo families hope that justice might finally be enforced. Germany reacted quickly. They took the case to the International Court of Justice in The Hague, arguing that states are protected by sovereign immunity. Germany's legal team insisted that allowing countries to seize state property for wartime acts could destabilize international law and open the door to countless similar claims. In 2012, the ICJ delivered its verdict, saying Germany was protected by sovereign immunity, even for crimes committed during World War II. The decision was a devastating blow to the Distomo families. Years of legal battles, evidence gathering, and hope ended with a sentence that reduced decades of suffering to a legal technicality. Once again, human tragedy was outweighed by formal law. Yet no ruling could erase the truth on the ground. Distomo itself still carried the memory of that day. Above the village, on a gentle slope surrounded by olive trees, stands the white mausoleum of Distomo. It was built years after the war, once the village had begun to rebuild. The bones of the massacre victims were respectfully moved there, giving families a single place to mourn. Names are engraved on the walls. Ages are listed, from elderly villagers to children and even infants. Every year on June 10th, descendants climb the hill to honor the dead. They ring bells and lower flags. Names are read aloud, one by one. The ceremony focuses on memory, not anger. Mothers, fathers, children, and grandparents are spoken of as if they are present, because in the hearts of survivors, they never left. Some German officials have attended these ceremonies. They laid wreaths and expressed regret, acknowledging the horror of what happened. But regret could never replace justice. Men like Fritz Lautenbach and Hans Zampel lived their lives and died quietly. The mausoleum stands as proof that not all war crimes end with punishment.